Hey everybody, welcome back to Missoula Dems Show. My name's Andy Nelson. I'm the chair of the Missoula County Democrats, and I'm joined by my new co-host today, who is...
Hey, I'm Sam Kula. I'm the state committee man for the Missoula Democrats.
All right. And today for our guest interview, we have a very special guest, Kiera Condon, who's the advocacy specialist at the Montana Food Bank Network. Welcome, Kiera.
Thanks for having me.
You betcha. Thanks for joining us. So I got a little blurb about what Montana Food Bank Network does. MFBN is Montana's only statewide food bank and partner food bank of Feeding America. They serve 330 network partners, including community food banks, pantries, schools, senior centers, and shelters, united by a shared mission to end hunger across our state. In addition to distributing food, they advocate for long-term policy solutions to strengthen public nutrition programs and address the root causes of hunger. Sounds like good work.
It's great work.
All right. Well, cool. I will take the first question here. Okay, let's dive right in. To start, Kiera, can you tell us a little about yourself, your role as advocacy specialist, and what a typical day looks like for you?
Yeah. So I've been in my role at Montana Food Bank Network as advocacy specialist for a little over a year now, and I've been in Montana for close to 3 years now. I've always been super passionate about anti-poverty work. I think that's what drew me to this position. And yeah, I just don't think there's anything better than feeding people, especially feeding kiddos and families. A typical day for me can look very different depending on kind of what's going on. But basically all things policy. So during our legislative session, I stay very busy. Right now I'm very busy because there's going on with like Farm Bill. I don't know if people remember there was a government shutdown a while back. Lots of major changes to policy in like the food space. Also just like doing stuff like this, getting out into the community, talking to folks. But the favorite part of my job is when I get to go out into Montana communities that I typically wouldn't go to. So tomorrow I'm going to Polson. In August, we're doing like a huge road trip where we're going all the way out to Sydney.
Nice.
July, we're gonna be in Cut Bank and Rocky Boy. So that's my favorite part of my job.
Wow.
That's good, yeah, and you're good at it too. You know, I've known you since you got here to town pretty much, and I couldn't think of a better thing for you to be doing now. So the Montana Food Bank Network does a lot more than just distributing food, right? So why is advocacy such an important part of your mission, and how does changing policy basically help reduce hunger in the long term? Yeah,
so Montana Food Bank Network, we have 4 pillars. That's procurement, distribution, so procuring food, distributing it to our network partners. And then we have 2 other pillars, which is education and advocacy. And those are 2 really big, important parts of the work because procurement and distribution meets the immediate need. Advocacy and education changes the circumstances that like create that need in the first place. So addressing the root causes of hunger, addressing the systems and policy that make our neighbors need a food bank in the first place.
That makes sense, yeah. Fighting generational hunger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For people who have heard of SNAP but don't fully understand it, what is the program, who does it serve, and why is it so important for Montana families?
Yeah, so SNAP stands for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It is a grocery benefit program, so eligible families can apply and they get a grocery benefit every month that goes onto an EBT card, and that can be used at participating retailers just like you would any other card, like a debit card. SNAP is so important for Montana families and people in Montana is because we're a very rural state. We're very geographically large and sparsely populated. So that comes with its own challenges when it comes to food insecurity. But SNAP is essential when trying to fight and combat food insecurity. But really what it does is it bridges the gap for folks experiencing hunger, and that whether they're dealing with like times of unemployment, unexpected expenses, medical emergencies, things like that. And people who are on SNAP are typically on it for less than a year. So it really just acts as a helping people out of poverty, helping people out of tough times. And that's what we hear the most. And in Montana, SNAP helps nearly 80,000 Montanans every year.
Wow.
Yeah, it's super important. So there's a common misconception we run into from time to time that food banks can make up for cuts to SNAP and they can carry that load, right? Can you kind of explain the relationship between food banks and SNAP and why it's not a direct replacement?
Yeah, so SNAP is a federal program, and to put it into perspective, for every food bank or for every meal a food bank provides, SNAP delivers 9. So you can see that big difference there. Another good example is during the government shutdown, we saw like a hunger crisis, and our communities, our neighbors really stepped up to meet the need, but it was a hunger crisis. When folks didn't get their SNAP benefits for those couple of weeks, they were going hungry, and our food banks could not replace it. Another important thing about SNAP that differs from like food banks is, you know, everyone has different dietary needs, so the food bank can't always provide that. And a lot of our food banks, especially in Montana, are volunteer run. You know, they're in a church basement ran by, you know, the sweet old lady in town, and it's open one day a month. So to say that food banks could replace SNAP is not only like completely unrealistic, but food banks were never intended to be a federal program. The charitable food sector came about to be supplemental, helping folks with immediate hunger needs in times of crisis, not like anything what SNAP does.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Before we move on to the next question, I remember last fall when the government shutdown happened and resources for SNAP were on hold essentially, and us Democrats were really pushing messaging for the state of Montana to open up the funding that they had set aside. Correct me if I'm wrong here. We'll see if I remember correctly, but like the legislature had some funding for emergency usage, but the governor was not allowing that to be open. Is that correct? What happened?
Essentially. So essentially what happened, some other states were doing that, using state funds to supplement SNAP until
the
government reopened and people could get their SNAP benefits. Montana had a special pot of funding. The name escapes me now. But essentially it was a pot of funding that was intended to replace federal funds. And so to a lot of people, we're experiencing a hunger crisis, people don't have their SNAP benefits, why can't we use these funds? Even if it's not gonna cover all of the SNAP benefits, it's going to like help. Like any little bit helps at this point. Right. And yeah, ultimately the governor decided not to do that it's a federal program.
Yeah, well fortunately I know a lot of people around the state really stepped up and donated to their local food banks and were able to temporarily relieve some of the pain,
but we're still, you know, people are still feeling the effects of that. Because, you know, if you think about not getting your SNAP benefits, okay, well, I have to buy food somehow. So where was that money coming out of? So a lot of people maybe got behind on rent, maybe got behind on utilities. Maybe they were saving up money to get their car fixed so they could have an easier commute to work. Maybe they were saving up for a kid's new pair of shoes and they had to spend that money on food. So just because people got their SNAP benefits back doesn't mean they got that money back that they did end up having to spend on food.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That makes sense. Yep.
Okay, Congress recently approved major changes to SNAP. What are the biggest changes and what concerns you most about how they'll affect Montanans?
Yes, so there was a number of changes that went into effect July 4th of, what year are we in? 2026, so July 4th of last year. And some of those changes were administrative changes and some of them were eligibility changes. So when it came to eligibility changes, previously eligible immigrants were no longer eligible. In Montana, that came up to about 300 individuals. That's a result of, you know, we see a lot of attacks going on right now to our immigrant communities, so that's part of a broader pattern. And those the groups that were previously qualified, refugees, people who are escaping like domestic violence in their countries and came here. So that, and then also changes to who is subject to work requirements. So SNAP has always had work requirements since the 1970s. And so people who are, they call it able-bodied without dependents, able-bodied adult without dependents, are subject to meet 20 hours of work a week. And originally, before HR 1 passed, folks who were subject to that were people who weren't subject to it were older adults over the age of 54 and parents and caregivers of kids 18 and under. We also had what's known as some exemptions. So people, if you met certain criteria, you were exempt from meeting these work requirements. And that included veterans, individuals who are unhoused, people under the age of 24 who were in foster care. And it also included, for Montana, we had what's known as a geographic waiver for reservations. So if you lived on a tribal reservation, you were exempt from meeting these work requirements. What happens if you can't meet a work requirement? So everyone is subject to what's known as a 3-month time limit. So in a 3-year period, if you are not meeting your work requirements for 3 months, you cannot get SNAP for 3 years. So it's a harsh work requirement.
Wow.
So a lot of the rhetoric that was going around about, introducing work requirements for people on SNAP aren't working, that's false.
Just not true.
Not true. And a lot of people who, were exempt from work requirements were exempt for a reason. Older adults, people who are parents and caregivers of children, people who are unhoused, like that kind of stuff. So now, people who are subject to that 3-month time limit includes parents and caregivers of children 14 and older, exemptions for veterans, unhoused individuals, people 24 who are aged out of foster care, and then older adults aged up to 64.
So it went from 54 to 64.
Or sorry, 62. Went from 54 to 62.
Wow.
Keep working, right?
Yeah.
You've kind of answered a lot of what our next question was here.
Yeah.
When you think about all these different groups that are being impacted by these changes to work requirements for SNAP, who do you feel like is most at risk, of these different demographics and segments who are being kind of, asked to update their?
Yeah, so like I said, older adults, veterans, people who are unhoused, parents and caregivers, our tribal communities, people living on reservations. They did add an exemption for Native Americans in HR 1, but the way that they decide that, there's complications with it. So we've seen a lot of people fall through the cracks in that way. And yeah, kids are going to be impacted. Nationally, nearly 800,000 kids have lost SNAP benefits. In Montana, nearly 7,000 people have lost SNAP benefits since the July 4th implementation date. And yeah, our rural communities, rural resources, or rural communities already struggle with the lack of resources. Transportation is an issue, jobs. These are all challenges in rural areas that are being compounded by the loss of SNAP.
So it sounds like there's not just one group that's hit hardest by this, it's just hitting lots of different people. Yeah.
Beyond helping people buy groceries, SNAP also has an economic impact. How does SNAP support local grocery stores, farmers, and rural economies across Montana? Yeah,
so SNAP has an amazing economic impact. So for every dollar spent in SNAP benefits, it can generate up to $1.50 and even up to $1.80 in economic downturns. SNAP is really great. We have in Montana a program what's known as Double SNAP Dollars. So folks who are on SNAP can go to their local farmers market or some grocery stores accept Double SNAP Dollars, and they'll get essentially double up their SNAP dollars up to a certain amount if they purchase fruits and vegetables. So for local farmers, local producers, they're opened up to a whole new market of people who maybe previously weren't able, who wanted the fresh fruits and vegetables but weren't able to afford it. We talked to the store manager at Orange Street Food Farm just last week, and she said that last year alone, SNAP brought in $15,000 to their store. So that may not seem like a large amount if you're talking about like an Albertsons or a Walmart, but when we're talking about like small local grocers, you know, Orange Street Food Farm is family owned, you know, that's not a small amount, and especially for our rural grocers,
Right.
that's definitely not a small amount.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's an important element. Yeah. So one of the really interesting things about your advocacy work is that you also focus on like listening to people with lived experience using and, you know, living off these benefits. And so like, why is it important that the voices of people experiencing food insecurity are included in like policy discussions?
Ultimately, because the policy that's going to be impacting the most should have, you know, a seat at the table, a say in what policy is going to be happening or what laws are going to be made, if it's going to be directly impacting their families. So we really value the lived experience of Montanans, whether that's people who are on SNAP or people who are experiencing food insecurity. Anyone kind of battling those challenges of rising costs and not knowing where your next meal is coming from, that's essential to advocacy work. If we don't know, if we don't hear from those voices, if we don't uplift those stories, we're not doing the work right.
Totally. Yeah.
Looking ahead, are there state or federal decisions that people should be paying close attention to?
Yes, absolutely. So the Farm Bill, the House versions of the Farm Bill passed at the end of April, and then the Senate just came out with their, the Senate Agricultural Committee just came out with their version. In there, what I didn't mention before about some more changes that happened under HR 1 is an administrative cost increase of SNAP and then a benefit cost shift. So previously, all states have paid about 50% of SNAP administration, but benefits, SNAP benefits, have been 100% federally funded. HR 1 changed that, and now Montana will have to be paying 75% of administrative costs to administer SNAP, and that's going to be starting October 1st of 2026. And we're going to have to start paying a portion of SNAP benefits based on what's known as a payment error rate. And so I'll explain briefly what a payment error rate is. It's essentially overpayments and underpayments of SNAP. It's not a measure of fraud. Majority of payment error rates are, you know, someone at the office made a clerical error. Working with outdated technology. Someone didn't call their caseworker on time and said, oh, actually my income changed to this. So they're not a measure of fraud, but essentially what's going to be happening is if you have a payment error rate that's over 6%, you're going to be on the hook for a certain percentage of SNAP benefits. So it varies state to state of how much you're going to have to pay. The fiscal year 2025 payment error rates just came out the other day, and Montana's payment error rate was just around 8%. So we're going to be on the hook for $16.4 million in SNAP benefits. So back to the Farm Bill, something we can do is we are pushing for a delay in the benefit costs so that states have a little bit more time. You know, there was a lot of changes that came down with HR 1. That's a lot for any government agency to deal with and implement with care and in the right way. And so obviously that's a lot of changes. And so our payment error rate and the fiscal year 2025 payment error rate is not exactly reflective of, you know, recent. It's more what was happening before HR 1 was implemented. So before Montana knew that they were going to be on the hook for this, they've been trying their best to get the payment error rate down, but it takes time. So what we're asking the Senate for is to have a delay in that SNAP cost shift so that states aren't going to have to be footed with such a huge bill. Because what's going to happen is that money is going to come out of other things. So other programming we have in the state, other things that we're paying for, or if the state decides it's too costly, they may stop doing SNAP altogether. There was a recent survey, and about 11% of states said that that's a serious option that they're looking at. And 5% said that they would consider pausing SNAP.
Oh, well, that would not be helpful at all.
No.
Wow. So, Kiera, you have a ton of information, and I feel like there's a lot more to this than we're going to cover in this interview. If any of our viewers out there in community access TV land were really fired up and wanted to get involved with fighting hunger in meaningful ways, in Montana especially, what are some ideas for how they could get involved?
Yeah, so I think a great way to get involved right now, MFBN is doing a SNAP myth-busting campaign. So if you go to mfbn.org/facts, we have a whole webpage there where it's just the real story on SNAP. It explains everything from how eligibility works, what applying looks like, to all of these HR 1 changes. So that's a really good place to start if you're just wanting to learn more about the program and what it does for Montanans. If you don't follow MFBN on social media, it's just Montana Food Bank Network. You'll also find a lot of our myth-busting posts on there. We'd love for folks to be sharing that. You can also sign up for our action alerts. We're going to be sending a lot of those out as Farm Bill is happening. That's also at mfbn.org. And then also, like, share your story. I know it's really hard to be vulnerable, but like I said earlier, those are the kind of stories that are most important to be heard. And also, like, stories touch hearts and minds in the way that, statistics won't. We hear a number like 6,900 people lost of SNAP. That's a huge number, and it's scary, but when you hear from a real person that happened to, it's much, much different. And then volunteer at your local pantry, call your local food bank, ask, do you need any volunteers in the kitchen today? If volunteering isn't your jam, maybe you can donate monetarily.
Totally. Just good stuff.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today, Kiera, and thank you for the great work you do. I can't really think of anything more important than keeping people fed. So thank you.
Yeah,
Keep up
thank
the
you
good
guys.
work. And thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.
Take care.